Hello Internet, welcome to the channel, and in this video we're going to be building an enclosure for the wonderful Gharial. That's right, the next animal to be joining our franchise mode zoo, Litte Asia, is the Gharial. I thought we were quite lacking in terms of the number of carnivores we have in the zoo, and I really wanted a crocodilian. We don't have anything that is quite like that. I think most mammals and stuff, they're kind of similar, if you know what I mean. Whereas so far, in terms of reptiles, I think all we have is the Komodo dragon. And since I played so much Jurassic World Evolution 2, it feels wrong to not have these massive lizards. So I thought we'd go with the Gharial, and that also enables us to build an entirely different type of habitat to what we have done before, because this one will be primarily water based. We've built the island for the proboscis monkey and the small clawed otter, and we've also built the enclosure for the flamingos, but both of those have quite a lot of land in them, whereas this time I really wanted to limit that. So obviously the first thing that I did for this enclosure was to start marking out where I wanted the water to go. So as you can see on the ground, I had already marked out where I wanted this habitat. I have 3 planned, and the way that I planned them was just by marking out with some dirt where I wanted these habitats to be. I thought it was time to start building behind the dome that we built a few episodes back and start filling out this rear section of the zoo so that we can really round it out and have it looking quite nice. Either side of this habitat there will be 2 more carnivore enclosures, so make sure to subscribe to the channel if you want to see those. That will be the last 2 enclosure builds for Litte Asia. So if you have suggestions for what the next franchise mode zoo should be, what theme it should have, what name it should have, let me know in the comments down below, as I'd like a little bit of community influence on this one. I kind of want it to be more of a community build. So let's start concentrating more on this build and what we did. Once I'd used the terrain tools to mark out where I wanted the water to go, I left 2 little islands and a deeper bit on one end where I wanted there to be a submerged viewing gallery. Up the other end we're going to start building our animal house, and for this one I'm going to be using building pieces from the East Asia theme pack, and I want it to be semi-submerged. So I'm going to do the basic outline of it to begin with. Well, first I place the floor where the animals are going to sleep, or whatever, the actual covered shelter area. But then I'm going to mark out the rest of the building using wall pieces, and then start digging and adding slopes and stuff. It was very much a process of going back and forth, adjusting here and there to try and get this looking just right. In terms of getting the actual terrain underneath to look right, it was a bit finicky. Had to use a lot of the push and smooth tools in order to make sure that it didn't look really crumbly and jagged and horrible. It was a bit of a like I said, it was a bit of a finicky process, but we got there in the end. I didn't go too mad with decoration on this one, but I did add a little bit just to break it up a bit, because these buildings can look a little flat if you're just using the same kind of wall pieces and stuff. It's good to add some wooden beams and whatnot to just break it up a little bit. And then once I was done with that, it was time to move on to the rest of the habitat. For this habitat, I didn't want to go with one of the standard barriers, so what I did was I went over to our pangolin habitat that we built pretty early on in this series, and I pinched my fence design from there. All I did was select one of the posts and then 2 of the cross beams, and that is basically an entire fence panel that you can copy and paste together to create a functioning barrier. Now, you may notice that there is a massive gap in the middle, which I feel like an adult Gharial might be able to escape. So with that in mind, after I've placed this initial piece, I go over to the construction tab and I look for some mesh. I'm going to get a appropriately sized piece of mesh and kind of just place it in between all the pieces of wood so that it looks like it is, it's going to be filling that massive gap, ensuring that no animals can get through. This kind of suggests that the animal is a bit more dangerous as well, I think, by having this metal reinforcement on a wooden fence. So I think it works quite nicely. And once that is in place, it's just a matter of copy and pasting all 4 components: the initial post, the 2 wooden beams, and then this metal mesh. Copy and pasting that around the perimeter of the enclosure until I'm happy. When the new barrier had got to the end of the enclosure that had our underwater viewing gallery, it was time to whip out the glass barrier, sink it into the ground either side of the viewing gallery, and then start to bridge the gap so that the water will be contained. Just like when I was building my waterfall, you want to make sure that the glass far exceeds where you're going to have the water go up to, so that you can fill it up as much as possible and then shrink it accordingly afterwards. After that, it's just a matter of finishing up the barrier that we were placing beforehand, and then using a null barrier to go around the edge of the enclosure to make sure that our fancy fence does actually work as a barrier and the animals can't escape. Next, I had a habitat gate to our habitat house so that our zookeepers can actually access the enclosure and fill up all the feeders and stuff and make sure it's clean. Then I use a door from the East Asia building pack just to go over the top of it, because as you can see, the slope on this wall that I've chosen means that the door isn't actually visible. So I'm just going to put a mock door over the top just to make it look like it actually functions properly. Now, I had previously seen this really cute bridge in the East Asia building pack, and I wanted to make sure that it was included in this enclosure. I figured I could have the feeding tray be in the middle of this island that is in the middle of the enclosure, and have our keepers need to access it by going over this bridge. As you can see, the gap from each portion of land was a bit too big, so I emptied the water, got rid of all the water in our lake kind of thing, and then just made sure that the ground from the island reached the other side of the bridge so that it can actually function as a pathway for our keeper. And as per usual, whilst we're waiting for our beautiful Gharials to arrive from the quarantine centre, we are going to add their enrichment items all over this enclosure. And as always, you need to make sure that the food items are accessible by the keeper, so they're going to be kept closer to the actual habitat house and this island that they can get onto. There is an exception, and that is the fish feeder. I'm going to place this right at the bottom of our lake, right in front of the viewing gallery that we've made, so that the fish will come up there and the alligator Gharials, hopefully they will be feeding at this end of the enclosure from this, giving an excellent view to our paying guests. When it comes to placing the toy enrichment items, we can place those basically anywhere, because the keepers don't need to be able to access them in order for the animals to use them. So we're just going to place them randomly around the enclosure to make sure that our animals are using as much of their habitat as possible. And with the arrival of our gorgeous male Gharial, I can't believe how big it is, this was a real shock to me. We can go over to its terrain tab and start to make alterations to meet its terrain distribution needs. Now, perhaps unsurprisingly, this guy doesn't really want too much grass, he wants a little bit more sand, because he hangs out at the beaches with the gals. Don't know why I said that, that was a bit weird. So yeah, the main alteration I had to make for this enclosure was adding a bunch of sand. Didn't take too long before our animal was happy, and we can move on to adding plant life. For adding the foliage for this enclosure, I really wanted to lean into this idea of it being quite a tropical swamp sort of area. So there are quite a few trees, and later on I add quite a few of the mangrove trees as well, because obviously they grow in swampy areas, and the big kind of tendril-like roots really suit a swampy environment. So I lean into that quite a bit, use quite a lot of bushes and stuff, and I make sure there's plenty of water-based foliage. So that's our lily pad kind of things, and our reeds. I use a couple different types of reeds. We're also making sure that any rocks that we use in this enclosure are the ones with the algae growing on top, because that just adds to that tropical vibe. And near the end I also change the colour of the water to be the tropical colour, because you can change the colour of the water. You can make it really bright colours, which is a bit strange, or you can have them fit certain biomes and continents and stuff. Or maybe not continents, just biomes. And it really changes the appearance, and the tropical one makes the water look really clear. I also use some bamboo near the habitat house to kind of block off the visibility of the staff area that is just behind it. I don't really want our guests to be able to see that from the bridge, so I use really tall bamboo to kind of block that view. Other than that, it is just a really random placement of plants to make sure this enclosure looks really alive and it's nice and tropical. I'm going to pop this in time lapse so that you can enjoy that, and I'll be back in a minute to talk more about what we did in this habitat. Once I'd finished with the foliage for this habitat, I decided I wanted to add a couple decorations, and I knew exactly what I wanted to place in this habitat. There are two types of boats that I wanted to include to make it look like a proper abandoned swampy lake area. So we got this one from the East Asia pack. This is just the East Asian wooden boat, and I also, well, I make sure that this is angled to begin with so that it does look like it's washed up on the side of the banks. It's been abandoned for a little while. You know, it's even got these the lily pads growing inside of it. I think that actually adds something to it. It wasn't necessarily intentional, just a happy accident. I then apply the Indian theme filter to this and get the Indian boat, and I place it on another bank, also at an angle, so that it does look like it has actually washed up. I don't want it floating purposefully in the water. So yeah, these are a couple little additions to this habitat that I do think add quite a bit of character. Another small decorative change that I make to this habitat is to use the dirt tool and apply a layer just to kind of suggest a path where I think the zookeeper is actually going to be walking to get to the feeding station. It's not a huge difference, but it really does suggest a bit of life in this habitat. It makes it look like the keeper is visiting often, which obviously he is, and this kind of thing actually might happen in the real world. I think it just looks really nice. At this point, I thought this enclosure was done, so I unpaused the game, went over to our Gharial and looked at the traversable area to make sure that he could get outside. And he couldn't. He could only actually stay on the area that I'd kind of designated as a sleeping platform. So I tried to fix this by using one of the climbable platforms and putting it right at the kind of exit of this archway so that he'd be able to climb out that way. However, it does not work. These animals have a huge hitbox. They're quite narrow animals, but they don't seem to be able to get through quite wide openings. It is really frustrating. So after what felt like a lifetime of editing the ground and the building, I finally got it to work. But I did actually have to change how this building looks quite a bit. It's a lot more open and it's definitely more accessible for our animals, but it's not really what I wanted it to look like. So that is a little bit frustrating. But I am happy with how it looks in the end, so it's not too bad. And with those alterations to the habitat house done, this enclosure was complete. Thank you for having watched this video. If you enjoyed it, please consider giving it a thumbs up and maybe subscribing to the channel to see what else I build in Planet Zoo Console Edition. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.